Good evening. We'll return to open session. There we have no reportable actions to report from closed session. Got my words mixed up there. I'm first going to ask for someone to approve the agenda, make a motion to approve the agenda with one addition. I'd like to add public comment on items not on the agenda after item 10, so right after the student trustee reports. Understand there's some employees in the audience and teachers that need to leave early. We'll still have public comment at the end of the meeting. So can I ask for a motion to approve the agenda with the addition of boy, am I having a hard time tonight, with the addition of a public comment on items not on the agenda after item 10.
So moved.
Is there a second? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. That passed. Is there a volunteer to review the board norms?
Sure.
Thanks.
Come prepared and the board will come prepared and be fully present and engaged, deliberate effectively and listen openly without interrupting, work collaboratively and build toward consensus, maintain perspective with a sense of humor, not repeat each other or ourselves, not have side conversations, give full attention to the proceedings, no cell phone use, focus on the best interest of all students, and commit to no surprises.
Thank you. Now I'd like to ask if there's any public comment on the consent agenda. Any items on the consent agenda? Are there any items on the consent agenda that a board member would like removed in order to consider as a separate item? Okay, in that case, can I ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda, please?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That passed. Thank you. And now we'll move on to the student trustee reports. Is there anyone that would like to go first in particular? Okay, thank you.
All right, so Drake is wrapping up the semester. So this week is quiet week, so that's been filled with sort of de-stressing events like we usually do. One of those is tomorrow morning at 8 in the Student Center. It is pajamas and hot chocolate, so students can come in their pajamas and get hot chocolate tomorrow morning. And then that is also this Friday is Ugly Sweater Spirit Day, so encouraging people to wear ugly sweaters to school just to celebrate the oncoming winter break and fun sweaters and for a de-stressor event. Then also tomorrow we have our last Student Senate meeting of the semester. So what we'll be doing is kicking off our subcommittees for the rest of the year. So we'll be deciding which subcommittees we'll do and who wants to be in which ones. The sort of themes we've been kicking around this year are rewriting the dress code. Drake doesn't really have a dress code, but we still on books have a dress code. So we're thinking about this year looking at the wording of our dress code and trying to make it match more the actual practical policy at Drake and also make it inclusive of everyone at Drake. Some other things, looking at every year we look at classes, often do surveys about what classes students may or may not want to add to the curriculum. Also, looking at bullying prevention is something new we might do this year. And then also an environmental subcommittee, so looking at environmental policy at our school. And then finally a subcommittee that wants to review our honor crew. So a few years ago, Drake revamped their honor crew. So now it's a pretty different process. Now you write a resume about different activities you've done and how they relate to different letters, which are, I think, like pirates, and they're all acronyms. So it's like integrity or teamwork. And then also there's a GPA minimum. And students want to sort of, now that we've had that for a few years, look at that and try to get consensus in the school about if they like that better or worse than what we had before, or if there's something different than the two that would be good, so just revisiting that. And then finally, our peer resource has been doing presentations in social issues classes, but they're also, for next semester, our administration wants a bit more of a whole school approach to the peer resource drug presentation. So if peer resource could give those presentations to everyone, not just freshmen, sophomores, is a goal that peer resource and the administration is looking at right now, and also looking into ways to change the drug presentation and really focus on preventative measures and also support for students, and really trying to make it a better way to prevent drug addiction or giving students help with drug addiction, and trying to give that to maybe all of the English classes, or all of the mandatory classes, so that all students could get that. And then also, because that is a bigger load on peer resource, our SOAR and ASB will probably help them with those presentations, because they are also giving all their other social issues presentations, and they also have to give consent presentations to everyone, and the suicide prevention presentation, and also their students and have their own classes that they have to be attending and can't miss class. So SOAR and leadership have been helping them out with things like that, and they're working a lot more closely this year, so hopefully SOAR and leadership can help them with those presentations.
Can you remind us what Honor Crew is?
Oh, yes. So Drake has Honor Crew, which is sort of, do you know what like CSF is? So it's sort of like a Drake-specific version of that. It used to just be grade-based, and you just fill out a form, but now we've changed it to this whole resume system, so it's a bit more holistic, and if you don't meet some of the requirements, there's also a attendance requirement, which is excused and unexcused. And then if you don't meet some of the requirements, you can also like write a letter saying why you don't meet the requirements. So it's more of a holistic approach and not just a grade cutoff. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so Tamalpais is winding down for the year. Last Tuesday was our holiday party. It was planned by CEC. It was very fun and amazing. People from all programs attended to eat the bounty of food and to watch Elf, the movie. The food drive is still going on, but participation is slower than we would have liked. There are a few bins around campus, but they're in unnoticeable places, so I don't think people are really getting the message that they should bring in food, especially since there was only one email set out, and that should have probably been more. This week, we are in the midst of finals. Different from the previous years, we have designated class times to take our finals instead of a selection. So in the previous years, there would have been 5 or 6 slots you can show up to take your English final. Instead, now there's only one time you can do it. Same with science classes. So now there's a designated time. If that doesn't work for you, teachers have been very easygoing. They're like, okay, you can come to this other class. And it's worked quite smoothly. I myself took my chemistry final in the physio time slot. So with this new scheduling system is it keeps the SIS room open, which I think has been a big benefit. In the past, people did their SIS work or just studying in either the team rooms or the hub, but because the team room and the hub aren't really where people are productive, it was more of a socializing area. So people never got down and studied, especially with the cubicles and the computers that are in the SIS room. Those are good study aids. So having the SIS room designated as study area, especially during finals week, it's a big help. So I think that this new schedule has some kinks, but I think it's a better system for Tamalpais.
Thank you. Kara.
So it's been a really long and hard couple weeks at TAM, so I kind of have a lot to say. I have some notes. I'm just going to kind of pile through it. If you have questions, feel free to stop me or I can answer them at the end. I tried to make it so that they all kind of compile, all the events kind of compile on each other. So for those of you who don't know, on November 14th, there was a military-style arrest of a Drake and a TAM alum in Marin City early in the morning on a Thursday, weekday. The raid involved a loudspeaker, a shelter-in-place order, an armored vehicle, and a full SWAT team in military gear with assault rifles. This affected many STAM students who were very traumatized by the events. Some had assault rifles, were woken up, knocked on the door, they came out, and there was an assault rifle pointed in their face. Their family was thrown on the ground. Residents were forced to stay inside and were unaware of what was going on. 3 days later, the 2 suspects were released with no charges pressed. This further upset the Marin City community and TAM community at large, as then questions were raised on why the level of force was needed during the arrests, or why the arrests were even made in the first place if they were able to be released so quickly after. The week following, there was a community healing circles in Marin City where TAM PTSA sponsored food. Many TAM staff and community members attended those events, including counselors and Mr. Farr and various others. SOAR hosted a lunch the week after, it was like directly a week, that Thursday, the week after, where a lot of leadership students were encouraged to attend. I would say almost 70% of the leadership class was there, as well as many history teachers encouraged their students to go there. SOAR students talked about the impact that they had felt or their peers have felt due to the raids, and how other students, especially in particular Mill Valley students, can best support their peers, and mentioning to make sure that they understand that this was a traumatizing event for students, and going up being like, oh my God, what happened, to make those students retell the story and relive it, for both teachers and staff to be asking those questions, trying to explain how that's not the best effective system. Our counseling coordinator, why am I blanking on her name? I have it written down. She sent out an email to the whole staff trying to talk about how to best help these students. And Tupac Shakir's sister, she goes by Set. I cannot pronounce her full name. I couldn't find anyone at TAM who could pronounce it. But she came into a BSU, or for a TAM, Black Student Union and Students of Color. Basically, they function as one organization. And she came in and talked with the club and about what happened in Marin City and how the community is healing. And it kind of demonstrates how one of the many ways that the TAM and Marin City community kind of combined and acted as a whole. The worst possible timing could have happened that the Friday before break, about a week after the events in Marin City, the TAM News published their December issue, which had a racially insensitive cover to women of color. There was a really rushed process with the TAM News trying to get it out before Thanksgiving. This meant that far less people saw the final cover of the issue, including our advisor and the majority of the editors. Upon receiving the physical issues, TAM News staff failed to recognize the harmful stereotypes that was depicted on the cover and proceeded to distribute magazines Friday after school, and an issue was placed in every teacher's box. Within 30 minutes of realizing what happened, what the cover represented, the article was taken off all digital platforms. We stopped distribution. TAM Newsies went back to school. I was back at school. We were trying to grab them from everywhere we can. We were pulling them out of trash cans, and we're in the process of destroying them at the moment. 4 editors-in-chief, including myself, and a features editor who creates the cover, met with our principal, Mr. Farr, about 2 hours after school. And we explained to him how exactly we got in the situation and talked about apology measures moving forward. We posted a letter of apology on our website, which was written by the eds-in-chief, which are all 5 seniors. I'm one of them. But we worked with our advisor, Mr. Steinhardt, and Mr. Farr for advice and feedback on the letter. Monday after break, we did a debrief in every journalism section. This included, sorry, I'm like rambling on, every section. This included the nonfiction who they don't work directly with the magazine, and the advanced students who it's their 2nd or 3rd year in journalism, they directly create the magazine. We talked, it was the first time anyone had been in a group since the cover had been released, since Thanksgiving immediately followed. So a lot of kids were very much in their emotions and feelings, especially the advanced kids. We talked in every class exploring the stereotype and why it was so hurtful and how the systems we had in place failed to recognize it. Yeah, I have some reflection. Do you want me to share that as well, or questions? Keep going? Okay, sorry, I have notes. I've been a little stressed for this meeting. I think the biggest takeaway from all of this, I've talked to the school at large, leadership and TAM News, also female teachers of color, teachers in general, admin, students, and at-large community members, that there's really systematic blind spots within TAM, the whole district, and Marin at large, that are really having harmful effects on our students of color. teachers of color have expressed to me, when talking to them, I talked to a lot of people before this meeting trying to make sure I could represent everyone as accurate as possible, to also other teachers and to leadership in SOAR, that teachers of color have just been exhausted because they've become the go-to support network for when racial incidents like this happen, especially with Marin City, everything that happened there. In addition, I forgot to mention this, but our Wellness Center was closed for 2 days exclusively for students that were residents of Marin City so that they got the resources they need. PTSA brought in food all day, and that also happened. But that they have been kind of crying out for support from other white teachers, white allies, administration, anyone who is willing. They've just been overwhelmed with everything. But it doesn't, and with this, I know TAM News, we had, everyone had been kind of going to the same teachers of color or teachers who run SOAR and BSU, and they're like, you guys, like, as a community, we need to learn how to deal with these issues ourselves, and we can't rely on our staff members of color to hold our hand through every process. And I think that's been a biggest takeaway from at least the journalism department. For me personally, I know that just the whole school, we just need to slow down a little bit. I know for TAM News, like, it's a high school magazine, who cares if it comes out before Thanksgiving, that we just need it to slow down. And like, while our intentions were to try and diversify our graphics, we didn't take the necessary precautions or talk about what that means, that we then brought race into the article, where we just didn't take our time. We didn't think we just kind of were trying to fast track everything. TAM News now, we've spent the last week and a half, or week, I guess, since we got back from school, analyzing the coverage of the Marin City arrests and release of the suspects, looking at local articles and articles from national sources about what happened, kind of critiquing their lack of sources from the community. We're also writing our own news story that has been working with residents of Marin City, and students from Mill Valley have been working together. They have a plethora of sources from Marin City, trying to answer those key questions that many felt were unanswered in the local news coverage. TAM News is also writing 2 editorials criticizing the media coverage and questioning the police raids and taking a stand with our fellow students from Marin City. This is obviously only the beginning, and these are just words coming out of my mouth, and it's going to matter more the actions that the community takes. But yeah, that's what I had to say.
Oh, thank you. I was looking forward to hearing what you were going to share with us, and I'll open it up to the other trustees. But I do want to share that whenever anything, whether it's hurts somebody physically or emotionally, or if, whenever there's anything that goes wrong in any institution, usually there's a root cause analysis done afterwards, and people have to be very, very honest and document where the process failed and report on that, and so it doesn't happen again. So that's one half of it. And if you didn't have a process, that's not all on your shoulders. If there was no process to begin with, there's other people that should have known to have a process in place, and that's just as concerning to me, to tell you the truth. The other half of it, with what you described, I really appreciate it, and I hope you can look at this as you being, as a student trustee in a leadership role, you have had to deal with a lot. And you can use this as, like you are, as an opportunity to model how a person does most constructively behave at a time like this. And the fact that you're talking and listening and digging deep and not denying that, not blaming everybody else, I mean, that's going to go a long way with the student body, regardless of the content, just that you're holding your head and you're not running away from it. So I do want to say I appreciate that, and I wish I could say it'll be the last time, but hopefully the last time with this content. But there's going to be other things that we've all had things like this happen, and I'm glad that you're hitting it head on. That's the main thing. So I'll open it up. Thank you.
So I second Leslie's comments, and then and I was horrified when I saw the cover, and I was impressed when I saw the letter from the editors-in-chief. And I thought that was acknowledging responsibility, and then I thought a sincere apology, and also a willingness to keep moving forward to see how to repair the hurt in the community, and also to prevent something like this from happening again, right? And we're all human, and we do make mistakes. And I second what Leslie said, that taking responsibility for it separates the leaders from those who try and deflect and avoid responsibility. So I was impressed with that. I did have some questions on one. You said that the TAM News is writing an editorial for the next issue about the raid. Yes?
Yeah, we're
Okay.
writing two ones focusing on kind of critiquing the media coverage. If you kind of Google like Marin City arrests, there's very few sources. There's no sources from Marin City.
Okay.
The majority of them are from Contra Costa County,
Yeah.
where the Orinda shooting happened.
Sure. And will you include an editorial or give an opportunity for community members to respond to the issue that you published?
Meaning the cover?
Well, meaning, yes. So
Yeah.
meaning, will you welcome critique and criticism from the community at the same time that you are writing a criticism of,
yeah.
a valid criticism?
Yeah,
right?
we tried to, so we republished the issue
Okay.
with a new cover, new graphics. There were the stories about maternity leave, maternity and paternal leave in the district. So there was various women of color or women of all colors, all skin tones, and then there were little like baby potatoes, we called them, and those were throughout the magazine. We tried to everyone gets pregnant, everyone is born. This is a great opportunity to diversify our skin color usage. Obviously, we didn't do that very well, but we removed all of that. We replaced them with like a new design. We changed the color scheme, and we reprinted them with our apology statement printed. That's going out. I think it came out today. We have the physical copies, and then we're printing a new one. We are not talking about the cover at all in this one. We're focusing on the events of Marin City, but we mentioned in our letter that we would love letters to the editor. So if that answers your question.
And then you also mentioned that one of the things that you learned in going through, the campus going through the Marin City incident, and then your reaction or the reaction to the issue, was that teachers of color expressed that they were exhausted being the go-to resource for issues as they came up around issues of color on the campus. Do you know of any steps that the campus has suggested, right? I mean, they may not be in place yet, but how the campus is addressing that exhaustion?
I don't know exactly if like administration has been doing anything, but I know just kind of talking with TAM News, we have like a teacher that like we've been known to kind of go for. She'd always went on our journalism trips, and then recently she's like, I'm fed up with you guys. Like you guys need, I think self-education is something that's been talking about, is that we can't rely on going to someone who has all the answers. We all need to learn these things ourselves. And I think that overall education and kind of, we were talking, because we've talked a lot about racial issues at TAM, and also we did a big unit on like sexism within the TAM News, and we were planning on doing one about race this month. But I feel like something that there's like this big disconnect, because like we know there's this problem at TAM, we know how it exists, and we arguably have an idea of the solution, and that was, let's say, using a woman of color as a graphic, but we don't have that middle lens, and I think that's what we've been relying on those teachers of color for, is that like we know the problem, we have an idea of the solution, how do we get there, and we need to learn through education and through talking about how we didn't recognize the cover, that we need to like broaden our racial lens, broaden all of our lenses, so that like we can identify if it's looking back, there were no women of color interviewed in that story, so maybe this wasn't the best time to try and diversify our graphics, and we just need to be a little bit more thoughtful, if that makes sense.
Anyone else? Karen?
I absolutely agree with Leslie and Cynthia's comments, and I wanted to say thank you, Kara, for speaking so openly about it tonight. I know that there was preparation and it's probably a little bit of angst, to say the least, but thank you for owning it in your personal way, and never once have I heard you throw anyone under the bus and sort of pass off responsibility. You've taken it head on, and I really appreciate that. And I already love hearing how you're thinking about moving forward and ways that you can possibly think about it, not only yourself, but in groups, whether it be your school newspaper or in leadership or in other classrooms. So, and we all can learn, right? We all have to keep our lenses open and just be aware. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I think I'll echo what everyone else has said and just leave it.
Tara?
Yeah, I just want to echo that and say thank you. I think for me, the most important thing that you guys are doing is you're staying engaged and leaning into your discomfort, right? As white people, we have the option of walking away from it. And I think, as I was saying to someone recently, like, the best thing that can happen is to fail forward, right? It was a fail, and you acknowledge that and acknowledge the hurt you cause, and use that to move forward and not walk away from the conversation. So I do applaud the students of TAM News for acknowledging that and leaning into the discomfort that comes with it and learning from it, because that's the very best thing you can do with this situation.
Very good. Thank you all. Thank you. So now we'll move on to public comment on items not on the agenda. It's helpful for the minutes, so yes, thank you. Yeah, it's not required, but it's nice when you do, so thank you.
Hi, my name's Francie Sal, and I'm not only a teacher at Drake, I'm a homeowner in Fairfax. And years ago, when my husband and I were looking for a house, we saw these really weird houses. There was one in Fairfax that had a bathroom in the dining room, and another that was advertised as a 2-bathroom, and the second bath was a toilet in the garage. And at each of these houses, we would look at each other and say, how can they be charging this much? And the real estate agent always had the same answer, was, oh, it's the schools. And so I want to thank the board for putting the parcel tax on the ballot, because I know that our enrollment has gone up and that our revenues have not. And I would hope that we could convince people in the community that our property values are tied directly to the quality of our schools, and that the quality of our schools is tied directly to the funding. And that if we can't convince people to vote for the property tax because it's the right thing to do, the parcel tax, because it's the right thing to do for the children in our community, and if we can't convince them to do it because a democracy depends on an educated populace, perhaps we can convince them to do it out of their own self-interest. When I look at how much the value of our home has gone up in the 5 years since we bought it, like 20% maybe, it is so much more than what we'll be paying in the parcel tax. And I think that's true for everyone in our community. So I just want to encourage you that as we engage with people who are against the parcel tax, to remind them the people who are against it are property owners, and they will benefit from the improvement that it brings to our schools. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Brad Widelock, and I just wanted to come and thank the board personally for taking on this courageous task of getting this parcel tax passed. My life is inherently tied to this district. My wife is a teacher in this district. My child is a student in this district. My full-time child. People often ask us how many children we have, and we often answer one full-time child and about 250 part-time children each year. I've been teaching in the Kentfield School District now for 14 years. So that's quite a few children I've sent into the TAM district, and I'm very proud of what they've done, what they've accomplished. I've had the privilege of teaching a couple of the children of board members who are sitting here tonight. So it is not easy. I know it's not, and I know it's a thankless task, and I was hoping that someone would come and look you in the face and say thank you. So I'm proud to be able to do that, and I'm happy to debate anyone, anywhere, at any time on the merits of this particular tax. So thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Anytime. This is my second board meeting because I was at Kent, so now I'm going to go eat dinner. All right, see you all.
Okay, now we'll move on to trustee considerations. This is discuss and take action on the 2019-20 first interim budget report and positive certification. Corbett Elson, thank you.
Good evening. Mayor, if you would, thank you very much. So again, it's my pleasure to present to you this evening our 2019 first interim budget presentation that is a subset of the narrative that was attached to this budget agenda item. So with that, I'm going to jump into things. So let's start with the why. Why do we do a first interim budget report? It's required. We're here to report the actual financial activity of roughly the first quarter of this fiscal year or school year. The fiscal year starts July 1st, even though we're not quite in school yet, but runs through October 31st. So what are the actual financial activity through that time period? And then what does it project forward? What do we think is going to happen from November 1st through the remainder of the year? So this is what this report shares. We're comparing two data points, the adopted budget that the Board of Trustees passed in June. That's where we thought we'd be for the whole year. And then comparing that to now, where we are as of October 31st at first interim. Those are the two comparison points. We'll talk about where it's similar and where there's some changes. And again, it provides an opportunity to the board, for the staff, for the community to have a discussion about what's changed. If we need to recalculate any things as a result of the changes that may perhaps affect future years, and any changes or action as a result of that. The board does need to provide some approval or consideration of this, a positive certification that I will be recommending tonight states that we will be able to meet all of our financial obligations. Qualified as may not be able to, or negative is unable, but I will lead with that we will be able to provide a positive certification recommendation. I'm not going to run through the agenda, but these are usual topics that we'll touch on, both at the macro level and the micro level. So let's start with the cycle. Every budget cycle has across the state has the same annual reporting points. We are here in December, again, the first interim financial report, that if you go counterclockwise, reports on all the activity going back to June adopted budget. We looked at our unaudited actuals that we presented in September for the prior year. That adjusted our starting fund balance for this year. And again, I'll talk about the changes made as a result of tonight. So we'll start with, again, the big picture. Where were we in June, and where does it compare to where we are now for this current fiscal year, 2019-20? So with that, the first two rows are in green are where we projected we would be in June. And the blue lines on the bottom are where we currently are, comparing both our operating surplus for this year and our in the two out years as well. So if you look in the top middle, we projected in June that we'd have an operating surplus of $201,000. And tonight, as a first interim, we're reporting a surplus of $208,000. So a $7,000 difference relative to roughly a $90 million budget. That is pretty insignificant. So we're projecting a similar spot for this year. In the out years, 2020-21 and 2021-22, we're projecting an operating deficit of $3.1 million for 2020-21 and a reduced operating deficit in 2021-22 of $226,000. I'll get into the why, what describes that later on, but this is the big picture. Also, you'll note that the reserve levels have changed as well. The reserve level for 2019-20 for June increased to where we are now in December. The result of that is the change in the fund balance from unaudited actuals. We spent less money at the end of last school year than we projected we would have. Partially, we had some increased revenue from property tax revenue. Our special ed department did really tighten the strings a little bit with some increased revenue and some less expenditures. And our departments and schools spent less money. So those are the dynamics I'll be touching through in this presentation. We'll come back to all those. So key assumptions drive every budget. So I want to touch on key assumptions for us and key assumptions that drive the entire state budget. I'm not going to touch on all these, but the ones I want to touch on are the estimated local property tax increase, the second row from the top. You'll see that we ended last school year higher at 6.63% growth of our property tax levels. I'll talk about that in a minute again, but that's artificially inflated slightly as a result of the Corte Madera Mall property tax remapping. So that artificially inflated that. Conversely, that additional revenue received at the end of last fiscal year, as you may recall, we have to refund or returned in this fiscal year. So conversely, in 2019-20, the 3.14% property tax increase for this year is artificially low. I'll get into more details and we'll see longitudinally why in a little bit. The other two lines I want to highlight are the STRS and PERS employee rate proposals. That is the amount that the school district pays on behalf of our employees to fund our portion of their pension. Those are derived directly from the state government, and that has been slightly reduced in one area as a result of the governor's enacted state budget. I'll touch on that in more detail in a little bit. So let's get into details of revenues and expenditures. As we've talked about in great detail, we are a basic aid school district. 95% of the state are state funder LCFF districts. What that means is they have an entitlement, a calculation on the number of students they have times the revenue per student equals their entitlement, the revenue entitlement. And when their local property taxes do not meet that entitlement level, the state kicks in and fills up their revenue bucket, if you will, up to that. That's where the state kicks in. Here in the TAM district, because we're a basic aid district, we still have to do all our calculations for what entitlement we would have, but our local property taxes are so high that they exceed that entitlement. Okay, so that we're able to, by law, keep our excess property taxes beyond that entitlement. So in the bottom left, we are $18 million over our LCFF entitlement if we were not a basic aid district. Is a beneficial place to be, except when we have pretty significant enrollment growth, as we've been discussing at great detail and experiencing. So let's talk about property tax revenues, because that obviously drives the primary our revenues in general. This is a historical analysis of our property tax increases. It is the usual cyclical curve you might expect related to an economy. The two at the right, though, you see it's began to slow down over the past 5 years, from a peak of 7.5% to a low of 3.14% next year. But again, as I discussed earlier, and as you see in the note, the Corte Madera Village Mall remapping that we talked about at unaudited actuals artificially increased last year's property tax and artificially lowered this year's property tax. So when we worked with the county, if you pull out the mall remapping dynamic out of that, in the note, last year's property tax increase would have been 5.73, and this year's property tax would have been 4.91. So that's much more in line with past history on that. Again, we get all of our figures directly from the Marin County Department of Finance. Here are current parcel tax revenues. We obviously have had them for quite some time. The blue level shows the original one we've had that's been renewed over many years. And the red one is Measure J, which was approved by the voters in November 2018. Those both have a 3% annual inflator built into them that explains the increases in the blue and the red lines. So that is an additional revenue on top of our property tax revenue. So if you look at our revenues in general, again, our general purpose revenue is primarily property tax revenue. We do get some state and federal funding. And then our local revenue is our other large significant revenue source. Again, that's our parcel taxes and our very generous foundations that contribute significantly every single year. So again, this year we're estimating $94 million of total revenue for this current school year. I'm going to briefly touch on just a reminder that there's a difference between unrestricted and restricted revenue. The combined column is when you take the unrestricted and restricted and combine that. By far, our unrestricted sources are more significant. Unrestricted means we have discretion of how we want to use them locally. We're not required to use them for a very specific purpose from either the state, the federal government, or even local sources. On the other side, as our public comments spoke to, enrollment growth is our significant driver of our expenditures. Again, the more students we have, the more teachers, the more counselors, the more support staff we need to have. So we've obviously been on a pretty significant enrollment growth history. Over the last 11 years, we've grown by roughly 35%, which is quite significant. We are projecting to hit our peak enrollment next school year of 5,270. I'm kind of calling that a two-year peak. We're projected to go down by 7 students the following year in 2021-22. But we're actually have the peak enrollment finally in our multi-year projection. So that's we'll begin to slow down and actually decrease in enrollment. But the decrease in enrollment is much slower than the increase has been over time. So again, our enrollment drives our expenditures and the staffing we need to have. This is just an update. There's nothing new here in terms of the distribution of these expenditures. 87% of our dollars are spent on people, salaries and benefits. Certificate salaries are teachers and counselors. Classified salaries are clerical staff, our custodial staff. And the benefits in the third row are the health and welfare, statutory benefits we're required to provide for all of our employees. So the first 3 rows are where you see, at least on the unrestricted side, 87% of all our expenditures. And that's because we invest in our people. Our people, our staff, are our largest assets. That 87%, by the way, is quite in line with the rest of the state. This pie chart just shows the same dynamic I spoke to. The 3, whether you're looking at the unrestricted or combined, the 3 largest pieces of pie there are our staff, the certificate salaries in red, the classified salaries in pink, I think that's what that color is, and the blue piece of pie are the benefits for all staff. So another large statewide conversation are those employer rate, pension rate increases. STRS for our certificated employees and PERS for our classified employees. This slide is updated. We've seen this slide many times, but it's updated with figures given the new information provided by the state. As we know, in 2013, Governor Brown passed pension reform legislation because our pension systems were predicted to become insolvent in the 2030s. So the solution hammered out in Sacramento is that all groups would need to contribute more into the system. So the state contributed more into the pension system. The employees pay more each month out of their paycheck, and the employers, the school districts, are contributing much more. These rate increases reflect the amounts that the employers, school districts across the state, are paying across the board. School districts are paying roughly, of the total increases, roughly 70% of those increases. So those rates are reflected there. I do want to note there is one change since the adopted budget. The governor and the legislation enacted the state budget. As you may recall, there was some one-time pension relief in those rates. So there's a slight reduction in the rates in the out years. So as the note states there, we have $500,000 less in the cumulative impact than we had in June. That being said, the cumulative impact over when pension reform started in 2013 into our largest window out is roughly $6.2 million annually.
I think in the past you've actually, maybe it was on a different spreadsheet, there was the actual dollar value associated with this percent. Or maybe that was during the pre-Parcel J. There was a time where you actually pulled it out. Okay. I know it's hard to do that, but.
I don't have it in this one. I know.
Yeah, but it just occurred to me that might be of interest. And then just to hold this thought, not now, but sure. We've all been very aware of things written in the paper and publications that have information that's just outright false. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to, at the end of this meeting, just kind of open it up to the board. You made me think of it here. Whether we want to, on occasion, write directly to whoever the author is, really just very basic, that the district, like what you're just saying, that we have no choice. We have nothing to do with the negotiation. And I'm aware that, people are concerned about that. So I just wanted to throw that out now, that maybe we can ask the board at the end whether it's something we want to explore.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And I have one question regarding what you just discussed. I think you said that we're responsible for, so with the new increase of the pension contributions, we're responsible for 70%?
School districts at large, yes.
The school districts are. And do you know what it was prior to the resetting of it?
I do not off the top of my head.
Because that might be useful information to have,
Agreed.
as well as showing additional.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments before I move on? Okay. And then this is just a visual that we've seen before. These are updated tables to show the changes I alluded to in the previous slide. But again, the broad trend is similar. The red line is where the dollar amounts would be for the TAM district pre-pension reform, the old rates. The blue the blue lines show where they currently are with the new rates. As you can see, they've grown both for STRS and PERS quite significantly, roughly double what it was prior to that. And again, that is not something we have any discretion over. Those are required by the state. So let's get more specifics into how this year's budget compares to where we were at the adopted budget in June and now in December at first interim. So as I alluded to, we predicted a surplus for this fiscal year of roughly $200,000. We're not projecting at first interim a change of an increase of that surplus of $7,307, right on the nose. And that increases our surplus up to $208,000. I say that tongue in cheek, but that's about as similar as you can be. But there are some differences I'll speak to. So what are the causes behind that $7,000 change? There are some more larger scale changes that net out to that smaller figure. First off, we did have an increase in property tax revenue, even with the Corte Madera Mall remapping included. So our property tax revenue increases compared to where we were in June is roughly, not what it says there, but roughly $750,000 to $800,000. When you pull back the roughly $500,000 we have to give back in the Corte Madera Mall remapping, the net of that is an increase of $250,000. But that kind of hides the fact that the real estate market is more resilient than maybe it was predicted in June. We also have a decrease in some of the parcel tax revenue for Measure J, just given the timing of when those were being collected, processing of exemptions, and also a change in recoding of the generous foundation donations that were made for this school year. We had to recode some of them, and that moved from one area to another and affected that slightly. Sure. It does not change the amount, but this is in the unrestricted area. Recoding it from restricted to that does have a change across those restricted, unrestricted lines. That's the recoding aspect of it.
So is this whole chart unrestricted?
Yes, this whole chart is unrestricted.
Okay.
Yep. Let's see, we did have a slight decrease in some of the certificate staffing expenditures given slight increase, a decrease in the certificate staffing figures related to the property tax raise. What we were budgeting in June, we knew we would likely have some amount. Where we landed, we had to adjust for that where we actually landed at unaudited actuals. We did hire some new special ed paraeducators. Again, students who come in with IEPs, individual educational plans. Sometimes some of them have rights to a one-to-one paraeducator to make sure they have access to the educational plan. And some various changes in various areas. We had to adjust some of the figures that came back with the final contract we got with BACR. There was a change to some of the maintenance amounts that were needed, given some of the maintenance with some of our pools. And some special ed transfers related to moving it from the unrestricted fund from the restricted fund. There's some other net changes of roughly $43,000 in IT and some site budgets. But the net across the board with all those together is a change of $7,246 for the better. So again, this is the first two columns show the changes in the operating surplus I mentioned a moment ago. Let's look at the top right column, the ending fund balance. So again, in June, we're projecting to have an ending fund balance for this school year of roughly $14.25 million. That amount represents a 15% reserve. What that 15% calculation is, the $14 million divided by the total annual expenditures roughly equals 15%. So that's what that reserve represents. Again, in unaudited actuals, we had an increase of our fund balance of roughly $1.8 million for what I described earlier on. An increase in property tax revenue, a decrease in site and departmental expenditures, and special ed had a pleasant change for $1 million for the better. They received some additional revenue in special education, and they decreased some of their expenditures, some of them directly tied to MPS and MPA placements, which are directly tied to the new Drake CEC classroom that began in January. So the $7,000 from that first interim, plus the $1.8 million for the better in September, combined changes our starting fund balance for right now at $16 million, which is an increase of roughly $1.8 million. We're getting closer to 17%. We're not quite there. What's that? Yes. So let's talk about other funds. The general fund is where we spend the far, far majority of our time, but the district has other funds. I'm not going to go through them all ad nauseum, but I want to highlight a couple items. First off, the first row, general, is the unrestricted and restricted combined, not the unrestricted we were just looking at. The unrestricted has a net change of $2 million for the worst. That don't need to be alarmed. That is always the place we're going to be at first interim, because we don't count the revenues we'll receive for restricted revenues until we actually get them. We plan on the expenditures, but we don't count the revenues. It's a conservative best practice approach. When we receive state revenues, federal revenues, other areas, we'll count those revenues. That figure will be much more neutral at second interim, so I don't want to cause any alarm with that. But I do want to highlight two other changes. The Adult Education Fund, the second row. The Adult Education Fund is combined of adult education and community education or community facilities funds. As you recall, last year, as a result of our fiscal advisory committee, we closed much of our community education program because that was a program that was running significantly in the red. We did outsource many of those classes to Community College of Marin, who continued on many of them. But the expectation in that program, in the facilities rental fund, is that they will be self-sufficient. We're expecting to not have any contribution to the community ed or facilities program, which will be the first time, as far as I can go back and look, that we were projecting not to have that. So that's a positive development. The third row I want to highlight as well is the cafeteria fund. We have a budget there. We're expecting for that to increase roughly around $7,500. There's also the expectation that the cafeteria fund, our student nutrition services, are more balanced. Not completely self-sufficient yet. That is a pretty significant gap that's been supported by the general fund for many years. But with the keen work of our student nutrition director, Lisa Herberg, we are looking to close that further and further, which means that the general fund will not need to support that by sending more money out to that. So that's a direction we're moving in. We also want to make sure that we're serving our students well, healthy foods, and have the appropriate staffing that goes along with that. So that's obviously a balancing act. And I lied. There's one more fund I want to highlight. The third row from the bottom, I apologize, the Capital Outlay Fund, or Fund 40. That is our most significant facilities fund. We have some significant facilities projects that we have coming up. Mr. Lars Christian, David O'Connor will be coming forward in the new year to bring an update of that. We have our pools are aging. While it may seem that they're only 12, 14, 16 years old, sooner or later they need to be re-laminated. We also have some athletic fields that need to be resurfaced. So we've planned for them. We have a budget for them, but that's an area we have to keep a keen eye on. The Capital Outlay Fund is primarily funded by the general fund. Every year the board approves a contribution to that fund. That's an area that I look very closely at outside of the general fund, given the large facility projects we have to continue to do. So multi-year projections. Back to the general fund. Let's talk about the revenue assumptions behind our out years, 2020-21 and 21-22. Local property tax is projected to grow at 4.8% for both years. That is an increase above roughly 4.2% where we were in June. So again, that's the Department of Finance signaling that our property tax revenues are more resilient than maybe where they thought they were at June. So that's a positive development. Federal state revenue expected to remain relatively the same. I did add that note I spoke to earlier that we remove those one-time funds, those are restricted funds, out of the budget until we actually receive them. So we'll put them back in. We have no reason to think we won't, but that's best practice. And then lastly, local revenue. Our parcel taxes have a built-in 3% annual inflator, just to make sure that the value of those dollars are not withered away by inflation. So 4.8% increase in property tax revenue is the highlight there. On the expenditure side for the 2 out years, again, we have another year of enrollment growth next year, up to 5,270 students, and a decrease of 7 students, or roughly that 2-year peak we've been talking about. That enrollment drives our certificated hiring. Next year, we're expected to hire a net increase of 0.6 FTE of certificated teachers or counselors. Of that, 3.7 FTE of that is related to the enrollment growth, given the new class size MOU. We're going to reduce the 3 next-gen science standard release periods provided to our science leads to coordinate curriculum amongst the science teachers are set to expire now that that curriculum has been implemented. And we do, as you may recall, have a phase-in for the class size MOU for our English department. That wasn't gone to the higher levels like the other departments. We agreed with our TFT colleagues to phase in the English department levels over the 3 years. So as a result of that, we're projecting to decrease our enrollment FTE across the district by 2.5 FTE next year. And then 2021-22, a net decrease of 1.2 FTE. We don't expect to hire any more growth because we're going slightly down. And again, that English class as MU is phased into another level. So we project right now we'll reduce our English staffing by 1.2 FTE district-wide. These are all baked into the budget. As we've talked about, our fiscal advisory, $5.8 million of ongoing expenditure reductions are assumed ongoing, with 2 exceptions: the reinstatement of the Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services and a teacher leader model. I want to highlight again that teacher leader model will not have release periods built into them like the former model had. Also, if we talked about all employee groups have settled in terms of salary through this current fiscal year, but not in the 2 out years mentioned here. So a cost of a 1% raise, which is the common unit, is roughly $580,000 for a frame of reference. So those 2 out years where we are showing an operating deficit, at some point, presumably there will be some increased expenditures there. Those red deficits will likely get larger.
So just to clarify, well, you said we invest in our people, you're saying we don't budget for that investment in people, correct? So the 1.2 doesn't reflect anything in terms of any raises, just to clarify. So, everyone's
correct. Best practice is you do not budget for raises. That's considered negotiating in public as opposed to out of not respecting the negotiating table. There's case law showing it's an unfair labor practice. We also negotiated last year that all new employees that were hired this school year now have a health cap where the district paid health benefits has a cap of $20,000 per fully benefited employee. At some point when those health costs exceed the $20,000 into the future, the amount above that would be paid by the employee. That's for all new employees. We obviously plan for special ed increases. That's a statewide dynamic where those have been increasing significantly at rates exceeding our revenues. We have historically the last 10 years had our special ed costs increase year over year, roughly 10%. That is reflected in our multi-year projection. And utilities expenses. There's been conversations around that, a lot with PG&E, a lot with the Marin Municipal Water District. Our net increase for all those utilities is 4% year over year. So all those are reflected in the multi-year projection. So again, reflecting that, I did add the 2 white lines at the very top where we were almost a year and a quarter ago, just for a frame of context. But the middle rows and the bottom rows show exactly where we are before. Again, to summarize, in the 2019-20 school year, we're almost exactly where we thought we'd be in terms of our operating surplus, but our reserve started at a higher level because we ended last school year at a better place. And then we still have operating deficits in the 2 out years of $1.3 million and roughly $250,000. But again, all that is baked into it, except as Trustee Oppenheim pointed out, we do not budget for raises in those levels. So that would that's not incorporated into that. I'm not going to go through this, but this is just another visual of what the actual multi-year projection is. This goes through the revenues in the top, the expenditures below that, the differences, how we account for our reserves, and going left to right vertically are the 3 years in the multi-year projection. These are many of the notes and the assumptions I've spoken on, but there's some more details in there as well for those that are interested to go deeper. So with that, we do have a requirement per Assembly Bill 1200 to make a recommendation. So the first interim projection is that the district, my recommendation is that the district will meet all its financial obligations this fiscal year and the 2 subsequent years in the multi-year projection. So the district is recommending a self-certification as positive. Moving forward, certain uncertainties and prudence, things we need to be mindful of. This is just a summary of all the things we talked about. I'm not going to read them to you. But again, we still have peak enrollment next year and the year after that. Sooner or later, the economy is going to be turned down, the normal cyclical economics of that. It's shown that 2020 has been a more resilient economic year than projected, but sooner or later, things will slow down. I touched on the large facilities projects we have in play, not only our athletic fields, our pools, but the next-gen science classroom conversions, given the chemistry grad requirement. Therefore, we need more chemistry-ready classrooms and all the safety that goes along with having chemicals in there. I've touched on salary agreements. We've settled with all our groups through this year, but not the 2 subsequent years. Those are not reflected in the budget. I've talked about STRS and PERS increases, special ed cost increases year after year. And then, again, the assumption that all of the $5.8 million that the Board of Trustees have approved over the last couple years, those are all assumed ongoing into the future with those 2 noted exceptions, the bringing back of the Assistant Superintendent of Ed Services and a teacher leader model, albeit retooled teacher leader model. We do have a class size MOU, and both parcel taxes expiring in June of 2022. So with that, in summary, we're showing a balanced budget or a slight surplus this year, but some operating deficits in the 2 out years that we've talked about. I do briefly want to just touch on informatively our parcel tax renewal. We found out this morning that it now has a letter associated with it. So we will be pursuing Measure B. Just an update timeline to remind the community of the conversation this board has had since May across the board with their community, both here and interacting with them. Measure B, again, will be in the ballot March 3rd, 2020. And a reminder of our existing parcel tax details, what that means to our overall budget picture. Our current parcel tax figures, revenues, represent roughly 17% of our annual budget. That's roughly $17 million. They both expire in June of 2022. And the 4th bullet kind of describes some of the language that was pulled out of the exact ballot measures on what they're here for. And again, they're here to retain and attract high-quality teachers, provide the amazing programming we have in our district, and the electives associated with that. From the bottom, if the parcel tax was not proposed to increase by the $190, what would that mean to our budget in the out years? If we were to give a raise, if there's all the assumptions baked into what happens in the future based on what we know, enrollment, STRS and PERS increases, special ed, we are projecting that we would have an estimate of a $3 million operating deficit next year, $3.8 million a year after that, $6 million in 2022-23, and $6.7 million in 2023-24. The increase that's represented in Measure B of the $190 increase, that equates across our entire county to $6 million of additional revenue. That $6 million in additional revenue for next year, when you build in the 3% inflator on top of that, is derived by balancing out the $6.7 million operating deficit. That's in red there.
But it's across our district, not our county.
I apologize, I say county, I apologize, across our district. Thank you for clarifying.
And so I don't want to belabor this in terms of things not being, the increase in salaries not being in the prior numbers, but just to tie this into the reserves.
Mm-hmm.
So with these numbers, what you're showing in terms of those deficits, essentially by the end of spring of June 2024, in aggregate, those would completely eliminate the current reserves.
Correct. Those, if you look at the $60 million reserve we have right now, if I'm following your logic, if you add, sorry, I'm going to laser pointer, 3 million plus that, plus that, plus that, that would exhaust our reserves, to your point, Dan. Conversely, with the $190 increase in Measure B, that will bring $6 million, if passed, by 2/3 approval of the community, that would bring an additional $6 million of revenue. When you bring the 3% inflator on top of that, those two figures are exactly the same. That means we will be balanced in that year. Further, the $6 million of revenue that's brought in next year, that will net out to a positive $3 million surplus. That is the exact mechanics of how we will reestablish our reserve to the board-approved levels. So we'd have a design surplus next year, the following year, and a mini one in 2022-23. Those 3 years are how we will reestablish a reserve back to the levels the board has approved, and then be balanced here, and then with the declining enrollment, we'll budget accordingly. Again, this is just the mathematics to an individual property owner. They're currently paying $455 per parcel for an annual amount. Measure B increases $190 on top of that. The rationale for that is to maintain our programming. As Dr. Tope spoke about last year throughout our engagement with the community, they spoke loud and clear that their number one priority was to maintain programming. We talked about that ad nauseum in our fiscal advisory committee. That increase would maintain those levels of programming, broad course offerings, the staffing associated with that, and prevent any significant cuts of staffing and programming. As I spoke to as well, that increase will balance our budget in that 2023-24 year, and with the surpluses in the years before that, we'll bring our reserve back up to the board policy of at a minimum of a 17% reserve amount. And again, the major assumptions we talk about are those property tax revenue increases directly from the County Department of Finance, those enrollment projections that we look at closely, not only the Decision Insight version that was presented to you in May, but our internal projections that we do to calibrate that. We'll start, Dr. Tope and I will start looking at that again in detail in January. A COLA relative to the Consumer Price Index for staff expenditures. And obviously, based on the current understanding we know for pension increase rates and special education. I spoke to how we budget for that. Those are built into it with those assumptions. And again, we've also talked about the term being 10 years. As Dr. Tope spoke about in November, we have declining enrollment in our district when we look out into our feeder districts, with the exception of this year's kindergarten class. This is the first uptick of an enrollment across the system. So it behooves us to look at a 10-year term to provide some cost certainty and revenue certainty through that kindergarten class, but we obviously don't know what's going to happen beyond that. And then back to the broad budget calendar, some key dates. The governor is going to propose his budget for the state in January. I'll be attending my usual conference to learn more about that. In March, obviously, we have a parcel tax renewal election for Measure B. And soon thereafter, I'll be bringing our second interim budget report for this year. I don't think we're going to have the results in time for Measure B to fully incorporate that into that report, because Ray works extremely hard in early February to start refining that. That being said, I can work on a way to have a follow-up agenda item immediately thereafter where we could maybe more informally model the dynamic that we hopefully see as a result of Measure B. Dr. Tope will be working hard on LCAP with the LCAP committee that needs approval of our goals and our plan to provide services to students. The governor then will have a revision in May of his budget proposal that will change based on feedback he gets from his constituents. We'll be keenly paying close to where those pension rates are. There's a lot of conversation that the state might have some surpluses. They may choose to take those surpluses and pay that down of the unfunded liability statewide for STRS and PERS. That's a wise use of one-time revenues that have an ongoing benefit to the entire state of California. And then in June, we'll propose a budget in LCAP to this board for your consideration for feedback, and then we must adopt both an LCAP and a budget by the end of June. So with that, I do want to give Ray, our Director of Fiscal, one last shout out for his fastidious work on this first interim report, and the rest of our business office staff. And with that, I'd love to entertain any questions or comments.
Regarding the healthcare system,
Yes.
that probably works because all the new teachers hired are young and vulnerable. But as they get older and likely sicker because age creates just more health issues, is there going to be a better healthcare systems put into place?
So the healthcare system, the healthcare that we have in place is provided to all of our employees, no matter where they are, whether they're newer, middle-aged, closer to retirement. So that the benefits provided to them are the same quality of healthcare. Right now, we in the district, prior to this year, all employees had all of their healthcare, the costs that were paid by the employer. The district paid for the entire cost. So as those increased year after year, the district paid for those increases. This past year, we looked at that in terms of our larger budget and had conversations with our labor groups, our friends in TFT, the teachers and counselors, and our friends in CSA, the custodians and clerical staff. And we said, how can we share this a little bit? An agreement, a compromise, if we will, was that all current employees that we've had in the system who've planned on this, made life plans, budget plans, they weren't going to have that pulled back from them. They were to receive, until as long as they're an employee of the district, they would have all of their health benefits paid for by the district. But the idea was that a new employee coming in hasn't had that promise made to them, that they would contribute some to them. So the health cap of $20,000 is not scheduled to kick in for a couple years. For all the new teachers and employees this year hired are still having all of their health care paid for by the district, but at some point, 2-3 years from now, it's likely that it will exceed the employer amount. So they will contribute some of that, the difference beyond that. So that's a current arrangement we have, which is pretty common across the state of California. Does that help answer it?
I think you had a question?
Just on slide 12, just to better understand the remapping, I think we've talked about it before, but just can you help us understand? So in 2018-19, it looks as though the remapping sort of aided it by 90 basis points, going up to 5.73% to 6.63, but then relative to what it would have been for this current year, comes down by 177 basis points. And so what is the remap? How does that work? It seems as though had a slight increase in last year, but then a larger decrease this year.
Yeah, again, full disclosure, I don't have all the understandings yet. We're just continuing to talk about the county level of the details of how that remapping works. The exact amount that we received this year is slightly less of, I don't know the figure off the top of my head, than what we're owed to refund back out. So to your point, it's not the exact, the increase is not the exact amount of the decrease, to your point. Also, baked in that is some natural growth in addition to that. Not all of it is, as you stated, related to the property tax remapping. We don't countywide have a full understanding of this. We're inviting the county office to speak to our DBO meeting. All the CBOs for all the public school districts meet once a month. Tomorrow morning is one of them, to dig further into that. So I don't have a full understanding of the point. I can't address the point you're asking, Dan.
But we will try to find that answer.
Yes.
Any other questions?
And then is it 3.14, is that, I like that, it's pi, I guess, is that what's being used for the, in terms of the revenue share, in terms of upside, if it's above that 3.14 this year?
No. So per the terms of the agreement, we were very specific on the measurement points. So the measurement point, both last year, that equated to a 1.2% increase. We were very specific on the property tax revenue projection at budget adoption in June. So in June, that 3.14% was a higher figure, 4 and change. So it is, at this point, not projected to exceed that. And the comparison point is also 15 months later in September of the unaudited actuals when we've closed the books for that year.
So I want to go back to what I mentioned earlier. I think we've all been reading what's been in the paper, and wonder if there's any interest with the board members to follow up, whether it's the board or the district, i.e. The superintendent, to provide accurate information directly to the author, not to write a letter to the editor, but to actually authors. And then in addition to that, putting more on our website, just very factual. It could literally just be 3 sentences to make it clear so that people understand that we do not negotiate the pension benefits, and we have no choice with how much, as an employer, we put into those funds. And that there's no Social Security for teachers. Just really getting those facts, and at least then we can refer people to the website. And I think I've heard, Kevin, you had an idea. You talked about it at a board meeting once about having some very simple video, and I mean, it'll be a separate, discussion, but just wondered if it was worth pursuing. And I know I think board members have, looked into these facts, and if you're interested, we could bring something to a board meeting to consider either signing as a board or just using that for authorizing Tara to go ahead and write a letter. Do you want to do that at the next meeting?
Sure, that sounds like a good idea.
Okay, maybe you could take that on.
I can do so.
Yeah. Okay, sounds good. And I think Dr. Topier would like to add something.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I've just been working on developing a FAQ, or frequently asked question, in response to some of the questions that I've been getting on this same topic. So I'm happy to work with whomever on just providing facts and clarification. I think, I think it raised some of the recent press coverage. I think raised more questions than answers around how pensions are funded. The fact that it's an obligation of the districts. It's not anything that we can choose to do or not do, and that boards do not negotiate pension rates. We're confusing to people.
Right. The difference between school districts and municipalities.
Yeah.
And I think that sounds like a good idea. So are we going to see the letter, or just Dan
I think
and Tara
maybe we
gonna
can
work
ask Dan to work on something, because I think you've been working, you've been delving into this issue, and then work with Tara, and then we'll bring it back to the board. We'll bring something back to the board next week, and at that time collectively discuss it and decide whether we want to sign it or just authorize Tara to work with Dan to get something out.
Okay. And can I just make a pitch for simplicity? And do not get involved in all the finer points of financing and all of those things. I think most effective to have simplicity, and even explain some of the terms, the difference between pension contributions and pension benefits. So that we all have the same, or the district has the same talking points.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Dan.
Leslie, if I could add, I don't think it's
Absolutely.
I don't think it's a data point necessarily for what you're just speaking to, but one thing that came up in a recent conversation Tara and I had with some interested community members on this topic was what we are spending. But one thing that made me think about is what we're not spending. We don't have any control of those percentages, as you just shared. But what we have done compared to a year ago, we did reduce our the number of salaried employees compared to a year ago of over 40 employees. When you take those 40 employees, compare those rates, that's something we're not paying in terms of those employer-paid pension amounts. So that's something I've been thinking about. We don't have control over those rates, as we all know. That's the thesis I think you're sharing. But some of the things we do have control over, we've taken some action with that.
Right.
That's a data point that I've been thinking about.
No, that's a really good point. You could include that with this reduction, this means we're paying this much X less in pensions, so.
Yeah.
No, thank you, everyone. I appreciate that. I think you're excused, but thank you. Do we have any public comment?
It's him.
The public
Oh, I want to get public comment.
Sure.
Is there any public comment? I don't know why yeah. Okay, in that case, no public comment. I don't know why. I thought there was people standing behind you.
Yeah, they were. They left.
Okay. Can I ask for a motion, please, to approve the first interim budget report and certify a positive certification? I just said that backwards, too.
Adopt Resolution 1917.
Adopt Resolution 1917. Where is that? That's not
sorry.
after.
Oh, my God, I'm not any help at all.
Yeah, jeez.
Sorry.
I move to approve the first interim budget with the self-certification of positive.
Thank you. Is there a second? Is there a second? Thank you. Roll call vote, Mary?
Is it a roll call?
Okay.
Nope.
I'm not going to listen. I'm going to just go by the agenda here.
I didn't say roll call vote.
Somebody did. Although,
We're all mixed up tonight.
and I'm just a little, anyway. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Thank you, that passed. Now we will move on to the
Resolution 1917.
resolution. Yeah, you're like media, whatever media, and actually it's 19-7 here.
Yeah. Thank you.
And this is here report and developer fee accounting and adopt resolution. Good luck on your finals. Get a lot of sleep. And thank you again, Kara.
Ready? Yep.
I'm ready. Thanks.
So the district in 2016 decided to pass a resolution to collect developer fees in our community. What developer fees are, basically stating when a property is remodeled, developed, that if there's any additional square footage associated with that space, that can potentially house a new student, a bedroom per se, an expansion. And that new student obviously someday will matriculate through our feeder schools and eventually to us. And we know there's a cost associated with that. So as a result, in 2016, we have, per government code, we have to come forward annually to account for that, to account for how those dollars are spent. The resolution states that we are ensuring that we're expending those developer fees in alignment with government code, which we are, and I'm going to speak to that tonight. So if you would, Mary, thank you. Just briefly here, we do need to publicly notice that we're having a conversation about this tonight. Notify any community members that are interested in such topic that they're welcome to come and hear the discussion. This is a resolution that's very detailed. The template's provided by the Marin County Office of Education. All those school districts in the county are using the same template with that. This basically outlines the government code, the requirements for how we use our developer fees and how we account for them. So this resolution states that we are indeed fulfilling that requirement. In essence, the developer fees must be used for enrollment growth or modernize facilities. In the past years, we have had significant enrollment growth. We've added portable classrooms at Tamalpais High School, Drake High School, Tamasco High School, and several at Redwood High School. In addition, we've added bathrooms at Redwood High School, and we've added a special ed CEC classroom at Drake High School. Those in general are how we've spent. Those are the projects we spent developer fees on last July, which is what we're accounting for, if that makes sense. We can read through this if you would like, but if you could go to, I believe, it's called Exhibit 1, the accounting of Exhibit 1. Sorry, Mary, if you go to the next page.
Not Exhibit 1?
Well, there's a...
Page 2 of Exhibit 1.
Yeah, keep going. There we go. Schedule 1, I apologize. There we go. Right there. So again, we're talking about 2018-19, last school year. The revenues of the developer fees collected are roughly $150,000. How that works, if you're curious, a developer or a landlord, I've had to go through some on the other end, comes in with an approved set of drawings. Hey, we're going to add a bedroom here. We come in with approved drawings. How many square feet are approved by the local planning commission? We take out an agreement, a worksheet that we've agreed upon with our feeder districts. How is Mill Valley Middle School, who has 9 grades, and Tan District, who has 4 grades, how are we going to share those developer fees that impact both school districts? Roughly, it's a 2/3, 1/3 sharing agreement for the grade levels we serve. We meet with the developer. I take out that worksheet. I verify that it's approved drawings. I find out how many square feet are additional. If it's below 500 square feet, it's exempt from an addition. So any square feet above $500 times the dollars per square feet equals the developer fees collected. And then per the sharing agreements with our feeder districts, we transmit roughly 2/3 of that to the feeder district, or vice versa. If they collect it, they transmit 1/3 of them to us. The net of that across our whole community It was $150,000 this past year. I think it was about $180,000 the year before. Year after year, that pays for a teacher. Well, we will take it. On the expenditure side, you'll see almost all of them are in materials. We're not paying for people in those areas, as you would likely project. The total expenditures were $342,000. We expended more than we brought in. The reason being, we chose to spend more out of that to keep the funding, the bureaucratic paperwork complete for these projects, as opposed to overworking our staff with pulling the funding for so many different funds. We just completed a project out of Fund 25 developer fees. We made a transfer over to make it whole. So that's what the $300,000 transfer in is related to. So given the revenue we collected, the expenditures we sent out, the transfer in to offset that, we have an ending fund balance in Fund 25 of $218,000 going into this year. And the bottom shows how residential developer fees and commercial developer fees are collected. Almost all of them are residential in our community, as you might expect. Yeah. Unless there's any questions for that, Mary, if you go down to the second schedule. This just speaks to what types of projects those developer fees were expended on. And the biggest ones were, I know it's hard to see, but furniture for enrollment growth, portables to accommodate enrollment growth, additional restrooms to accommodate enrollment growth, specifically at Redwood, the one that's right along Doherty Drive that you saw last summer, and the special ed classroom modifications at Drake High School. We didn't bring in a new classroom. We modified that to make it appropriate given the programmatic needs of the CC classroom. An office space, it's a beautiful classroom. So that's how we spent those dollars in those projects. The far majority of them were done in July of 2018 with the bathrooms, the portables, CC at Drake last winter. I believe that's pretty much it. That's how the district is accounting for developer fees, and I can ensure the board that we're spending them in accordance with government code. One last comment. If we don't spend their developer fees, we're showing there's not a need for them. Technically, after X number of years, I believe it's 3 or 4, developers could technically come back and reclaim them. So we're going to spend that every year. In fact, we might transfer in to make sure it's most restricted, just in case you're curious. There's apparently some areas of the state where that's an issue.
Any questions? No? Any public comment? Nope. Okay, now I'll get it right.
This is a roll call.
Yeah, this is a roll call, and I'd like to ask for a motion to adopt Resolution 19-7. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call vote, Mary.
Ms. Sloboda?
Aye.
Ms. Rodich?
Aye.
Mr. Oppenheim?
Aye.
Mr. Saavedra?
Aye.
And Ms. Harlander?
Aye. Thank you. So now we'll move to item C, take action on Form J13-A, request for allowance of attendance due to emergency conditions.
Great. So as we all know, in the state of California, we had the unfortunate events where our major utility provider, PG&E, initiated PSPSs.
Public safety power shutoff.
Thank you, which is somehow that's quite familiar, rolling off your tongue for some reason. Statewide and locally, we had to close all of our high schools for 3 days in October 28th through the 30th. Those are 3 days. In addition to that, we needed to close Tam High only on October 10th, and that's because of the localized specific PSPS closure. And in fact, that was only part of Tam High's campus. But we indeed needed to close that campus because of lack of hot water to serve food for those students to have the nutrition they needed, plus safety and dark bathrooms and across campus. So with that, we are submitting a J13 waiver if the board approves to the County Office of Education. They will review that. The idea is that if this is approved by the county office and then subsequently by CDE, the state, we therefore are waived to add additional school days to the end of the school year. There's a state requirement of 180 days of instruction. We've lost 3 days district-wide and a 4th day at Tam High. Based on the additional instructional minutes we have beyond the requirement, I think we feel confident that we're able to provide all the instruction we need and for all our key essential outcomes. So obviously there's discussion statewide as we've had previous conversations about how we need to prepare for in future years. The state's sending signals that we need to assume this is the new norm, if you will, therefore plan in some additional inclement weather days, which we're having conversations with our TFT colleagues, and I believe at the next board meeting we'll bring forward a proposal for next school year. But for this year, short of that, we're at this stage where we're asking the board to consider a J13 waiver for those 3 days district-wide and the 4th day specific to TAM. If you approve this, this will go to the county office for their consideration, then we'll go to the state CDE. The idea was to do this now in December, since now that the weather's here, we're not planning to have any future PSPSs, but should in the winter or spring we have some storm weather days, we had one at TAM a few years ago, we'll promptly come back sooner so we can get this considered, if approved, to the county and to the state, given we'll have a quicker turnaround for us to decide if we need to add any additional days or not.
It's like good field trip planning.
It is.
Any comments or questions? You missed that. You weren't on the board maybe then when we were, no, maybe you were. I can't remember when we were. Anyway. Go ahead, Ms. Ronish.
No, I'm ready to make a motion.
You go right ahead.
Well, no. Okay, I make a motion that we approve Form J13A, allowance of attendance due to emergency conditions.
Is there a second? Second. Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Thank you, that passed. And now we move on. It says here, discuss and take action. But then I thought I read down below that we were going to do it at the next meeting, but I'm open to either one. Since it says take action, we can do that.
Yeah,
Is that good?
we put take action on there just to give the board the option.
Oh, I see. So
We had, you had discussed it at the previous meeting.
Right, okay, so it's an option. Okay, if you recall, this is an item to revise the board bylaws to allow for the president and clerk to be able to serve more than 2-year terms. And so it's in here. I have a hard copy. Right. Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you. That's a good point. So if anyone has any questions or concerns about, okay, would anyone like to entertain a motion to revise the board bylaws as shown in the packet? I don't have it up here in front of me. Oh, there it is. Bylaws 9100.
No.
We'll have to move to.
I move to approve, or I move to revise the provision allowing for the beyond 2 consecutive years for the president and for clerk to serve.
Is there a second?
Can I just ask
Yeah.
a question on it?
Yep.
So we should actually amend it and then move to approve it as amended.
I thought it was in the packet for some reason. Maybe I was misreading it.
No.
Okay, then I
Right, so
misread
we're
it.
adding in and
Okay.
we're moving to approve
Okay,
it.
maybe I was
Correct.
reading this description is what it was. Okay.
No, so
We can't take action then tonight. We have to actually see it, or we tell them how we want to amend it, and then?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Let's see, maybe I thought it was here
Yeah,
that I
so
read it.
I didn't make any amendments because I hadn't heard specifically how to amend it, but you can amend it and we can, and approve it with the amendments.
yeah.
Because I don't think it's extensive, right? Is
I
it
think
just removing that one line?
I think it's just
Yeah.
removing that one
That's what I
line.
thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or it's a half a sentence.
I think it's a full sentence.
Oh, let's go find out.
Let's ask Cynthia.
I'm sorry, we're all getting a little punchy here. Okay, so is everyone comfortable with that? That if we ask to have that struck, we'll just say it that way? Okay. We have a motion on the floor, and might just want to clarify that the motion was to strike the language that's in the existing bylaws that refers to restricting 2-year consecutive
So
term.
moved.
Thank you.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The next item is discuss board committee assignments. And this again is here, as it says here, no action is taken. It's really just to have any kind of discussion, maybe questions, so that we'll be ready for the next meeting. And what it might be helpful is to, let me open this up. Karen will stay as the liaison with the student trustees. That's the one item that we do in alignment with the actual school year. Oh, I thought it was in here. I thought we had it in here. Can you put it up here then? Yeah. And so the MCSBA representative, I've gone to one meeting that lasted 5 minutes. So I can't really report out what I think this will be like, but I think you said you did it 1 year, or you did it at the other, you never went to the meetings either.
There was no.
Yeah, I can't quite figure.
I mean, it's there. The MCSBA seems to be mostly around putting on the events, right? The spring dinner and the fall dinner.
So it's like the Golden Bell Award.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
And then they do elect officers, but not sure that there's any policy. We're required to have a representative, and that is elected as opposed to appointed. But.
Okay. So I don't have much to say on that, to add to what Cynthia said. The LCAP committee, we have Dan and Karen working on that committee now, and maybe if you think right now, you might want to rotate off, let us know, and somebody else might be thinking about throwing their head in.
Maybe the switch is just in September.
Right.
Relatively fresh. I'm not sure we want to adjust to that soon.
Right, but we're going by the strict every December, we have to have an organizational meeting. I think it's actually, you don't have to, yeah. It's, and I was really surprised this is actually in statute that you do that. This is, we're so.
Yeah.
So, but if you were really going nuts on this committee, you could jump off in December, so. And Karen, you're looking at me confused or concerned.
You're now on this committee as well?
No.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No. No.
Trying to push us off.
No. We're,
No, we're going to agree, I mean, people will volunteer or agree to the assignments of December 17th.
Yeah, so we're just going through them.
Just giving, is there a heads up?
Yeah.
If someone doesn't want to continue serving, so someone can think about it, or are people interested?
Yeah. And let's see, like I said before, Karen will remain a student trustee liaison. Golden Bell liaison is vacant because we have Lars that goes, I mean. So I did that 1 year, and it's probably a little bit more work than the MCSBA, but there really wasn't much to it, so.
No.
And we should have on there, which we don't, but the policy committee,
Oh, that's right, we'll add that.
add that.
And right now, in the policy committee is Cynthia and I, because there was such a rush in the other direction when we brought it up.
We should stick with those assignments.
Okay, good. So you're all free to change your minds between now and next Tuesday, but we'll confirm that everyone wants to keep these the same next Tuesday.
And what time will we meet next Tuesday, 5 or 6?
I think we do have a closed session,
Yeah.
but, so, we will probably, our regular session will be 6. Closed will probably be,
But it'll be very short, yeah.
oh, famous final words.
Okay, so now we'll move on to superintendent report, I think. Yep.
Sure. So I just wanted to, I'm getting ready to send out my December newsletter, and with finals approaching, have some information in there around self-care and de-stressing, and just to make sure that families and students know that there are many activities and also resources available at the wellness centers around stress reduction and stress management during this time of year, to make sure that they're utilizing those. LCAP and Curriculum Council had a joint meeting last week, which was, I thought, very fruitful. There was some very interesting discussion. It was nice to bring Curriculum Council, who does largely looks at courses of study, graduation requirements, and programming, together with LCAP to see where we have alignment with our vision and goals. And so it was, we started off by having a conversation around equity and what does that mean to do equity-based work in a district and at the district level, and how can LCAP, both the process and the document, reflect that that's one of our goals. We also talked about our graduation requirements and to what degree they align with the goals and vision of the district. And then I did bring forward to this group there's a group of counselors that have proposed putting a cap on the number of honors and AP classes any student can take in any one semester. They wanted their proposals to cap it at 3. So we brought some data around how many students, we just looked at APs at this time, how many students are taking more than 3 APs. It's actually not that, it's 120 across the entire district. But also looking at, would that cap, who would it benefit, who might it not? How does that align with our goals as a district? Making sure that we're looking at all of our decisions through that lens of where does this serve? Who does this serve? I thought Dan was at the meeting, so he can speak to it. I thought it was a very interesting conversation. My feeling is there is no consensus among those two groups, or even within any one of those groups, as to whether or not a cap would serve our students well. I don't, Dan, if you have anything to add to that. You were at a separate table from me, so you had a different conversation.
I think at our table it was there was interest in leaving it more flexible without a cap, given 120 students in the district overall, taking more than 3 in any year. And I think it was interesting there. I guess the proposal that emanated from TAM, which across all 3 of the schools, the percentage of students taking more than 3 is very low, but at TAM was slightly higher. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, it looked as though maybe if there's a better job of educating students there, that would sort of self-correct. And so if it is an issue of stress at TAM, maybe there should be fewer at TAM taking more, but then wouldn't need to cap it, but via education if there is concern about it. But I think the concern was much more raised about an issue of stress, not an equity issue. Around equity, though, there was a discussion about algebra fundamentals where students who start off in that class in August freshman year then aren't A through G eligible. And so the thought was, what can be done to provide more support so that those who would be starting in fundamentals potentially can finish Algebra 1 and freshman year, so that they're basically A through G eligible throughout the year.
Yeah, without taking 4 years of math to become so, yeah.
Can I just make a comment on the AP? It sounds like it's, as you said, no consensus on it.
No, it's in discussion, yeah.
So at Alameda, it is capped at 4, and you can petition for more, right? Which brings in the education piece, all of that. And then, and there has been some discussion in the community about that. And students and families have pushed back, and has this teacher, that as long as UCs are offering credit for APs, and that can save a year of cost for college, that would be a difficult hard cap to have.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting conversation, and I think, Cynthia, to your point, that was part of the, who does it benefit and who does it not? Certainly in my former district back in Massachusetts, a main driver of students taking APs was to get as much of their college credits as they, for free. They had to take the test, but far cheaper than it would cost to earn a credit. So that it's an interesting conversation. And there's a lot to it. It's complex. You know, there is the drive that the College Board is driving, this curriculum, that our students are stressed, that the college admissions process does still emphasize most rigorous course offerings available to you. You know, so I think there's a lot to the discussion, and obviously a lot more discussion needed to be had, because like I said, it's still swirling, I think, for a lot of people. And I think a lot more discussion with community members as well. So that was good. I do want to follow up. I know Kara from TAM News shared the perspective of the students. I just wanted to follow up to say that Principal Farr will be holding a facilitated discussion with the entire staff on December 16th on race and racism and the impact on TAM's campus. This is not a new conversation on the campus, but I think really to start taking a deeper dive, and so we're doing this professional learning and we're looking at raising our racial consciousness, but how is that playing out? And are we seeing shifts? And if not, why not? And how do we then delve deeper into action and reflection so that it's not just a surface level conversation we're having, but rather truly shifting our culture? So that will be happening Monday.
Just to clarify, so you said that more, on the AP issue, you said more
Sure.
discussion. If there's not consensus and just impacting at most 120 students out of 5,000 in the district, and it seems as though there might be a majority of the board not in support of that, is there, I guess I might suggest there might not be such a need for continued discussion at this point at this level.
At the board level?
I mean, in
Yeah.
terms of just, well, the community, if the board's not supportive and it sort of goes through LCAP and then LCAP gets approved by the board.
Yes, got it. That's all I have.
Thank you. We'll move on to trustee reports, and I think you know what that is, but also I want to remind you that this is a good time because we're going to try and do it once a month at least, and to give a shout out, so to speak, for any sort of agenda item you'd like to place on reserve for us to discuss at the board sometime in the next, month or two.
I don't have anything I want to put on the agenda. I'm wondering what I've gotten myself into, but I volunteered or offered to go on the team hike on Friday.
Oh, that would be fun.
It'll be a lot of fun,
hike.
but it's 8 miles up
Oh, but
and
it's a
back,
good
and
it's a
so,
good hike.
yeah.
I've done that one. It's
I'm looking forward to competing against a bunch of
Well, it'll be
teenagers.
muddy too. So.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Is 8 miles long distance for you?
No, it's not about 8 miles. It's just about, 8 miles in the run. In the rain and yeah. It's yeah.
It's the Matt Davis.
No,
It's a
it'll be
nice
fun.
trail. It's a nice trail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'll let you know
And you
on
don't do the
Tuesday
steep
what that was all
stairs,
about.
too, on that one, right? You miss it.
Yeah, sure. Hopefully I don't
Yeah.
get injured like the team person did a couple weeks ago. So anyway,
Carried out on
that's that. Yeah, doing my time in the trenches.
Hopefully not in the trenches.
We'll see.
Please stay out of the trenches.
Wish me luck.
So last Monday and Tuesday, I had the absolute pleasure of participating in Courageous Conversations Beyond Diversity, led by Lori Watson, who is incredible. I learned so much about myself that I didn't realize I had to learn. And that's kind of the whole point of the thing, is that you don't know what you don't know. And I was probably, so there are 120-ish people there. I bet there were 5 non-educators. Really cool. There was a mother who just enrolled her son in TK. She's white. She enrolled her white child in TK at MLK. And she specifically chose MLK so that he'd be in a diverse environment. Well, she's got this young son, and she starts learning what's going on in Marin City Sausalito School District, and she just is delving into it. And I'm so proud of her story because, it's completely self-propelled in terms of her getting this training and learning more and really embracing it and trying to move forward. I do think it should absolutely be required of every single teacher. I'd love to see every single parent experience a 2-hour presentation if there is. I know she does it is it 2 hours? I couldn't remember. Yeah. Is it? Okay. Like just, it's so thought-provoking and really realizing how much we take for granted as a white person. It's really incredible. So that was incredible, and I'm really glad I did it. The other thing is I just wanted to give you, unfortunately, a sad update on, I told you that my friend's son was, died of an accidental overdose a couple of weeks ago, and the toxicology report did come back. And indeed, we still believe that it was an accidental overdose, but there were traces in his blood of Xanax, clozapam, sorry, is that how you say it? And 3 types of fentanyl. Did you know that there's 3 types? I didn't. I don't know the doses, certainly not enough to share, but just the fact that there's 3 different types of fentanyl. He was sold the drugs at Davidson Middle School by another young person in our community. And there were...
In our school community or in the community?
I don't want to clarify that because it's still under investigation, but there were multiple eyewitnesses to it. So
it's
it's
tragic.
just, it's devastating. So
Yeah.
That's my sad news update.
Thanks. There's all sorts of warnings, if you haven't heard them, all over Marin and the North Bay counties of fentanyl. We got a warning to our staff, like don't handle anything that you find on the kids because it can go through your skin, and that it's showing up in all sorts of ways. And the sheriff's department was sending out warnings like, just don't handle stuff, and to be on high alert. Just to remind the board, we do have Narcan at all of our schools for overdose purposes.
Thank you, Karen. Kevin and Dan, do you have anything?
I had nothing more.
Nothing more than Elka.
This is not about this district, but just following up on Karen's, we had a suicide over Thanksgiving in the Alameda School District, and it was by gunshot. And I think it just highlights the importance of, because afterwards she didn't go. She went to Alameda High School last year and transferred to the sister school, Encinal, this year. But so obviously students were affected, teachers. And in hindsight, many people were saying, oh, I wish we had known this, right? So there were things that, if people had paid attention, that perhaps would have been able to intervene. And so just the importance of what teachers do on the ground, I think, every day with students, and how hard it is for teachers who have 140 to 170 students, but just to encourage everyone on campus and who has any contact to, if you suspect that someone needs help, to really take that extra step and reach out.
No, that's well said. I don't have anything to report as well, so we'll move on. I'm assuming there's no public comment on items not on the agenda. So I'll ask Cynthia to review how we did on the norms, and we'll recess after that, or we'll conclude.
Let's see. I think we were prepared and fully present and engaged. The student trustees seem to be more engaged in this meeting. I think focus on the best interest of all students a lot of the discussions that we had tonight, including the report from TAM, is focusing on the best interest of all students and the community, the greater community at the schools. So those are our goals.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned.